Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we sift through the sources, extract the vital knowledge, and make sure you walk away well-informed about the complex histories that shape our present world.
Mhm.
Today, we are undertaking a monumental deep dive into the American family dynasty that has influenced global markets, medicine, intelligence, and government more deeply than probably any other.
Mhm.
The Rockefellers.
This is a story that is just defined by these almost unbearable contradictions. I mean, on one hand, you have the greatest fortune ever amassed in American history,
Yeah,
built on the, ruthless consolidation of the oil industry.
right.
And on the other hand, you have the pioneering architects of modern institutionalized philanthropy,
Yeah.
the people responsible for eradicating diseases and building universities.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really unpack that duality. We're going to move from the secretive Gilded Age tactics and the whole robber baron critique,
Yeah.
all the way to their deep, almost unbelievable entanglements in global intelligence, and of course, the sharp, modern ethical reckoning that their descendants are facing today.
Yeah. It's a huge story.
And when we talk about scale, you really have to grasp the sheer historical magnitude of this wealth. John D. Rockefeller Sr., the original Titan, peaked with an estimated wealth of $900 million in 1913.
And that figure gets quoted all the time, but its real-world impact is, it's difficult to even imagine. When you adjust that 1913 figure, not just for inflation, but for its relative share of the U.S. economy, that $900 million is equivalent to roughly $29.3 billion today.
Wow.
Yeah. And while the current family wealth, which is estimated around $10.3 billion in 2024, might seem lower, the sources make it really clear that this wealth is shielded. It's protected largely through these intricate, multi-generational, irrevocable trusts, all established meticulously by J.D. Rockefeller Jr.
Okay, let's pause on that financial architecture for a moment, because I think for our listeners who want that deeper knowledge, this is key. Why are these irrevocable trusts the secret sauce for maintaining a dynasty across generations, rather than just, passing down cash or stocks?
Well, it's a mechanism that is designed specifically for two things: longevity and tax insulation. An irrevocable trust, once you fund it, generally cannot be altered or revoked by the person who created it.
Okay.
And that structure means the assets are typically removed from the taxable estate of the grantor, so it insulates them from massive inheritance taxes across all these generational shifts. Junior used this structure not just to preserve the wealth, but really to institutionalize it and ensure his philanthropic vision, which we'll definitely get into, would outlive him by centuries.
Exactly, and that really is the central insight of this deep dive. It's that duality, this unprecedented wealth creation mixing with profound institutionalized societal impact, political power shrouded in secrecy, and this constant tension between business ruthlessness and structured giving.
Right.
I mean, the sheer breadth of their influence, touching everything from the global oil infrastructure to genetic research and the actual structure of U.S. governance, it just makes this story essential.
It's the perfect, complex case study in American power. And to understand the dynasty, you really have to start at the beginning with the foundational character, J.D. Rockefeller Sr., and the origin story of that robber baron label that haunted the family for a century.
Okay, so let's unpack this rise to power.
Yeah.
It all starts with the character of JDR Sr. himself. He was famous for being systematic, just meticulous, traits you wouldn't necessarily associate with sprawling industrial mogul. We're talking about a man who celebrated what he called Job Day every September 26th. That was the day he first entered the business world as an office boy.
That obsessive focus on the start, on the accounting, is so key to understanding him. The sources note that throughout his entire life, even when he was the world's richest man, he meticulously tracked every single expense in this little ledger he just called Ledger A.
Wow.
He was systematically frugal, and that focus on eliminating unnecessary waste, what he called marketplace inefficiency, that became his central business strategy.
He didn't just want to compete. He wanted absolute control to enforce that efficiency.
Yeah.
And that intense focus led directly to the foundation of Standard Oil in Cleveland, Ohio, back in 1870, capitalized at $1 million.
His strategy wasn't all that complex, but it was just relentless. Acquire, consolidate, and eliminate competition. By the early 1870s, he had launched what they called the Conquest of Cleveland, buying out 22 of 26 local competitors in this rapid, shocking move.
And his goal was what basically realized by the turn of the century.
Pretty much. By 1904, Standard Oil controlled a staggering 91% of oil refinement capacity and 85% of final sales across the entire U.S.
And this wasn't achieved just through having a better product or a lower price. This was structural manipulation that earned him that infamous robber baron label. Let's really zero in on the specific sneaky and coercive tactics that made this consolidation possible.
Okay, so the primary structural weapon was the railroad rebate system. The sheer volume of oil that Standard Oil could guarantee gave them leverage that no smaller company could even dream of matching. So they negotiated a rate with the Lakeshore Railroad, which is part of the New York Central system, of just 1 cent per gallon.
1 cent. What were his competitors paying?
The listed rates for his competitors were generally 4 to 5 times higher, so he secured a 71% discount, just ensuring his costs were impossibly low compared to any rival.
And the railroad just went along with this.
And the reason the railroad agreed: Standard Oil promised them massive, stable volume, at least 60 carloads of oil every single day, and they committed to handling their own loading and unloading. For the railroad owners who wanted predictability and high capacity, this was just irresistible.
But the result was simple. Smaller companies just couldn't afford to ship their product. He effectively had veto power over who survived in the industry.
Exactly. And if the rebate system was coercion, the South Improvement Company scheme in 1872 was, it was pure structural sabotage.
You have to explain to the listener exactly what a drawback was, because this detail is the absolute essence of Gilded Age ruthlessness.
Okay, so a drawback was a secret contract clause that was fundamentally anti-competitive. Standard Oil received rebates on their own shipments, but crucially, they also received a secret payment or a drawback on every single barrel of oil shipped by their competitors using the same railroad lines.
Wait, hold on. So the competitor pays the full high shipping rate, and a portion of that money automatically goes straight into Standard Oil's pockets. He was literally being paid by his rivals to ship their own product.
Exactly. It's insane, right? It meant the more successful a rival was in shipping oil, the more money Rockefeller made. This financial arrangement made competition literally impossible. It turned every other refiner into an inadvertent silent partner in the Standard Oil Trust.
So what happened when people found out?
Well, when news of this deal broke, it triggered massive public outrage, especially in the oil regions of Pennsylvania. His competitors convinced the state legislature to immediately revoke the company's charter.
But the damage was already done, I assume?
The damage was done. By combining these structural advantages, the rebates and the drawbacks, the sources show Standard Oil absorbed or destroyed most of its competition in Cleveland in under 2 months.
2 months. That is the definition of the robber baron era.
Absolutely. And that term, which was popularized during the Gilded Age, it described industrialists who amassed wealth through these methods that just prioritized ruthless efficiency over any kind of ethical business practices. And while guys like Rockefeller and Carnegie, they undoubtedly fueled America's massive industrial growth,
Sure.
Their methods were seen as fundamentally corrupting to the marketplace.
And the narrative needed a human face, a villain, and it found one in Ida Tarbell. Her 1902 expose, The History of the Standard Oil Company, was the definitive takedown. And for her, this was deeply personal.
It really was. Her own father was a rival oil businessman who had been just systematically crushed by Standard Oil's dealings. So Tarbell used this deeply personal motivation to paint this portrait of Rockefeller as a monster, a symbol of corporate evil. She even fixated on his physical habits, suggesting his famous fidgeting with his hands indicated a guilt-ridden conscience.
That's the power of narrative framing, right? Turning the complexity of a massive corporate trust into a moral monster for the public to hate.
Right.
But despite all the villainization and the eventual antitrust action in 1911, when the U.S. Justice Department ordered the breakup of the Standard Oil Trust into 39 separate companies, what was the end result for JDR Sr.?
Utter victory. Because he held stock in all 39 of those successor companies, the cumulative valuation of those separate entities, once they were freed from the political restraints of the trust, it just shot up.
So he didn't lose money.
He didn't lose a dime. He remained the world's richest man, and he watched his wealth grow even larger after the breakup. The government broke the monopoly, but in doing so, it solidified the fortune.
And that fortune and the family's image had another massive liability, fueling public hatred right around the same time. The secret, scandalous origin of the patriarch himself.
This is so critical for understanding the family's later obsession with privacy and public relations. We're talking about JDR Sr.'s father, William Avery Rockefeller Sr., known colorfully as Devil Bill.
Devil Bill. He was essentially a con artist, a bigamist, a philanderer. The sources describe this absurd beginning to his marriage. He married Eliza Davison after dropping this whole charade where he was pretending to be deaf just because she remarked she would marry him if he wasn't deaf and dumb.
And he secured the marriage because her father offered a $500 wedding present. I mean, that kind of opportunism just defined his life. After moving his family to Ohio, the deceit got even deeper. He took a second wife, a woman named Margaret Allen, while he was still legally married to Eliza.
Unbelievable.
And he was living under the alias Dr. Bill Levingston, a traveling eye doctor.
That dual identity explains so much about the need for secrecy that defined the next generation. But there was an even more serious incident that happened earlier.
There was. In 1849, Bill was charged with a really serious offense involving a maid and a firearm, a severe criminal charge. And to avoid a likely prison sentence, he paid bail, which he borrowed from his father-in-law.
Of course.
And then he heartlessly fled, abandoning his family back in New York as he moved to Ohio to reinvent himself as Dr. Bill.
So while JDR Sr. is building this impeccable, frugal, church-going empire, he's hiding these dark secrets about his father's life. But the truth always finds a way out.
And it did. In 1906, just as President Theodore Roosevelt was railing against him as a malefactor of great wealth, the press uncovered the decades-old secret of Devil Bill's bigamy and his criminal past.
Oh, wow. The timing couldn't have been worse.
Couldn't have been worse. This simultaneous public hatred for his financial ruthlessness and for his family's immorality, it forced the next generation to act decisively to control the narrative. The lesson they learned was simple. Massive wealth needs institutional protection, and the family name needs systematic purification.
So that massive, multi-front public hostility, you've got Tarbell, you've got Roosevelt, and now the Devil Bill scandal, it all required J.D. Rockefeller Jr. to completely shift the family focus. He moved the family from direct charity to this organized, strategic, institutional model, and in doing so, he forever changed American philanthropy.
Right. JDR Sr. was famous for carrying new dimes with him to hand out to people, particularly children, as this personal gesture. But Jr. realized that personal gestures were just not enough to manage a public image or structure a multi-billion-dollar fortune.
So the foundational step was chartering the Rockefeller Foundation, the RF, in 1913.
And this entity was totally unique for its time and its scale and its scope. It basically established the blueprint for the large, multi-issue organized philanthropy we see today. It was even initially housed at the Standard Oil headquarters at 26 Broadway, which really symbolizes that shift from oil profits to institutional influence.
And Jr., as the first president, he designed the foundation around two non-negotiable strategic goals. First was longevity. It was built to be durable, to transmit family values and influence for generations.
And second was strategy. They wanted to chip away at the root causes of societal problems. They were seeking cures, not just, ameliorating symptoms.
Which is a sharp contrast to some modern megadonors who might favor more immediate, sometimes disruptive solutions or short-term grants.
Exactly. The Rockefeller model was about deep, foundational, systemic change, and that required long-term commitment and massive amounts of capital.
And we mentioned earlier that this structure provided huge financial insulation. Let's dive into that tax advantage, because it's so key to the dynasty's survival. The large-scale endowment that Jr. established insulated a major portion of Sr.'s fortune from inheritance taxes, right?
It did. It established a largely tax-free wealth transfer mechanism that has protected the fortune for over a century.
And it's fascinating because this deep institutional knowledge of the tax code is why some voices within the Rockefeller institutions today are actually advocating for tax policy reform in philanthropy.
It's a bit ironic, isn't it? They argue that the current rules, particularly the minimum 5% payout rule, which requires foundations to give away only 5% of their assets annually, they say that's just insufficient. Critics argue this allows massive sums to just sit there, invested primarily to grow the endowment rather than being committed to immediate causes.
And the philanthropic sector, unlike the oil industry, often can't advocate for itself on tax issues without, alienating its own major donors.
Right, so a family with established credibility, built on the success of these very structures, is kind of uniquely positioned to suggest reforms. It's a fascinating layer of complexity.
But that structural power, even when it was aimed at systemic change, it was deeply compromised by the prevailing social and political conditions of the time. And we see this so vividly in their early work on education and race in the Jim Crow South.
The General Education Board, or GEB, was established in 1902, and its official mission was to support education regardless of race, sex, or creed. but the initial intent was a bit more specific than that.
What was it?
Well, JDR Jr. originally wanted a specific Negro education board, but his advisors convinced him that such an explicit focus would trigger a massive, probably violent white backlash across the South, and that would jeopardize all of their efforts.
Right. The sources document this intense concern that if poor white citizens saw philanthropic resources directed solely toward black children, it would spark a resentment that would just render all the work futile.
Exactly. So the GRB leadership yielded to the political reality of Jim Crow segregation, essentially acquiring what was called virtual monopolistic control of educational philanthropy for the South and the Negro, but they had to do it within these segregated constraints.
And this compromise had profound implications.
It did. While the GEB made some important contributions to infrastructure, one of its own officers, Raymond Fosdick, later admitted that the organization did relatively little for the children to whom nature had given darker skins, especially considering the scale of the need.
It's the ultimate ethical tightrope walk, right? You're operating within a morally bankrupt system to try to achieve some incremental change.
Yeah.
Did that compromise at least yield some kind of strategic benefit down the line?
Yes, on a purely practical level. The long-term involvement in the segregated South provided the foundation with this unmatched on-the-ground knowledge of the region's educational and social landscape, and that knowledge later informed subsequent civil rights struggles. However, the larger Rockefeller Foundation, it avoided direct engagement with racial equality programs for decades. They didn't launch an explicitly devoted program until 1963.
1963. Wow.
Yeah. And even then, internal staff acknowledged it was an exception to this policy, which really highlights the foundation's long-standing institutional reluctance to engage directly in social reform advocacy that might be perceived as politically disruptive.
And this strategic pursuit of root causes, however, leads us to the most controversial and frankly disturbing chapter of the Rockefeller legacy, the explicit funding of eugenics and population control research.
This is a dark, undeniable truth. J.D. Rockefeller Jr. was an open and very vocal supporter of eugenics, which was the pseudoscience aimed at improving human heredity through selective breeding and, critically, through forced sterilization.
And the financial support was massive. The Rockefeller Foundation was the primary financier for the eugenics record office in the United States up until 1939. But the truly chilling part of the source material is the international funding.
Absolutely. The foundation invested deeply in German racial hygiene research. They provided almost $3 million between 1925 and 1935 to key German researchers and institutes, most notably the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute of Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics.
And what's so astonishing is the timing of this support.
Yeah.
The funding kept going even after Hitler and the Nazi Party took power in 1933. And even after the implementation of the Nuremberg race laws in 1935, when the racist implications were just brutally clear.
It's hard to believe. For example, the foundation fulfilled massive pledges, I'm talking as high as $655,000, to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in 1936. That's years after Jewish scientists had been purged. The foundation executives, it seems, prioritized the scientific output and the reputation of the researchers over the clear political and moral implications of the regime they were supporting.
And that research had direct, terrible consequences.
Right.
The work of Ernst Rutten, who was a key figure funded by Rockefeller, directly influenced the Nazi regime's compulsory sterilization policies.
Right. And it's also noted that Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death at Auschwitz, he worked in a lab that had previously received significant Rockefeller funding. Now, to be fair, the executives did stop funding that specific research before World War II began in 1939.
But the underlying philosophy, this belief in controlling populations for some kind of systemic betterment, that didn't just vanish with the defeat of Hitler, did it?
Not at all. It simply morphed into more socially palatable forms after the war.
And the Rockefeller family was instrumental in that transformation, focusing on global population control.
Yes. As late as 1951, John D. Rockefeller III, that's Jr.'s son, and John Foster Dulles, they established the Population Council. And this organization was explicitly founded to advance family planning, birth control, and population control globally. It aligned directly with the systemic goals of the prior eugenics movement, just, reframed under the guise of international development and public health.
So this shift from industrial titan to institutionalized philanthropist, coupled with a vast international health presence, it gave the Rockefeller family this unprecedented level of political and global influence. This next section explores how they didn't just, donate to governments, but they systematically staffed and in some cases actually created the infrastructure of global governance.
This is where we really shift from high finance to high secrecy. Let's start with the creation of the American financial structure itself,
Right.
the Federal Reserve System. The Rockefellers were, absolutely instrumental in its birth.
The origin story is straight out of a conspiracy thriller, right?
Yep.
This secret meeting in November 1910 on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. Who were the key Rockefeller agents that were present there?
Well, Frank Vanderlip, who was then the president of the National City Bank of New York, a bank with massive Rockefeller interests, he was a central player. Vanderlip later confessed that he and the other attendees, who basically represented the major financial power structure of the country, felt as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator during that meeting.
And the result of their secret deliberations was something called the Aldrich Bill. But it failed. Why?
It was just too transparently a project of Wall Street and international banking interests. The public and Congress immediately recognized it for what it was, a financial power grab. The conspirators realized they just couldn't pass it under their own banner.
So they disguised the proposal, they successfully rebranded the core concepts, and had powerful Democrats, including future President Woodrow Wilson, promote the measure, presenting it to the public as a way to strip financial power from Wall Street.
It's an incredible sleight of hand. Vanderlip, who was instrumental in the original Aldrich Bill, he admitted later that the essential points they agreed upon in secret on Jekyll Island were all contained in the final Federal Reserve Act that was adopted in 1913.
So the structural insight here is profound. A group of private interests successfully created a central bank, which is nominally under government control, but is legally insulated from political accountability.
Exactly. And the consequences of this structural shift have been immense. It's fundamentally changed how Congress exercises its monetary power.
In what way?
Well, critics argue that since the Fed's founding, the national debt has just exploded from a manageable $1 billion before the Fed to these astronomical levels. But more fundamentally, the Federal Reserve operates as an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government, operating the money powers that are supposed to be reserved for Congress. It shifted ultimate control over interest rates and monetary policy away from elected officials and into this insulated body, which inherently benefited massive creditor interests like the Rockefellers.
So beyond controlling the flow of money, the family made sure they controlled the flow of power by systematically staffing the highest levels of government and foreign policy. And they did this by transcending party lines through networks like the Council on Foreign Relations.
Right. The scale of their influence is just often underestimated. It is reliably estimated that over the decades, the Rockefellers have placed at least 5,000 people in key positions at the highest levels of the federal government.
5,000.
Yeah. And this isn't just about political donations. It's about ensuring that the top tiers of the civil service bureaucracy align with their global interests, regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is in the White House.
And we can see this influence through a whole litany of specific, powerful appointments. Let's start with Eisenhower's administration.
Okay, you've got the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles becomes Secretary of State, and his brother Allen Dulles founds and directs the CIA. They weren't just political allies, they were Rockefeller cousins, and had served for years as high-level corporate lawyers for Rockefeller interests.
And the pattern just continued right through the Cold War.
It did. Dean Rusk, who was serving as the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, he becomes JFK's Secretary of State. And reportedly, it was an appointment Kennedy made largely on recommendation without even having met Rusk previously.
And of course, the iconic one, Henry Kissinger.
Henry Kissinger. He served as Nelson Rockefeller's personal foreign policy advisor for a decade before being elevated to Secretary of State under both Nixon and Ford. The goal was always consistent. Ensure that the gatekeepers of U.S. foreign policy, the Secretary of State and the director of the CIA, were consistently their boys.
And we can understand why this was so important if we look back at the original Titan's views on government. JDR Sr. himself wrote about the utility of this government reach in his own reminiscences.
He was very explicit about it. He stated, quote, "One of our greatest helpers has been the State Department in Washington. Our ambassadors and ministers and consuls have aided to push our way into new markets to the utmost corners of the world."
So the CIA, which was created and staffed by Allen Dulles, it effectively served as the covert intelligence and enforcement arm, just securing the stability required for global resource extraction and market expansion.
Precisely. And if the State Department was the official arm, Rockefeller Center itself became the physical hub of this covert infrastructure during World War II.
Yeah, this part is just amazing. The sources confirm that during the war years, the center, specifically the International Building, was a veritable sky factory. Room 3603 functioned as a major wartime intelligence hub.
And the FBI was operating there, secretly moving into room 4332 of 30 Rock in August 1940. And they set up, under the ultimate cover company alias, the Importers and Exporters Service Company.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what was their job?
That was the first known instance of the FBI operating a long-term cover company for its special intelligence service. And their job was critical, gathering intelligence and running counter-espionage operations against Axis spies, subversion and sabotage links all across Central and South America.
And Nelson Rockefeller's own Office of the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs provided the perfect cover for moving intelligence personnel into and out of the complex.
It did, but the British intelligence presence was maybe even more audacious.
Okay, what were they up to?
The British Security Coordination, or BSC, operated out of the 35th and 36th floors, disguised as the very innocuous-sounding British Passport Control Office. This was a massive operation. We're talking an estimated 2,000 spies.
2,000 spies. And what were they doing? It wasn't just traditional spying, was it?
No, it was deep into psychological warfare, news manipulation, and black propaganda. Their primary target was undermining any movement that might prevent the U.S. from entering World War II. They actively worked to discredit isolationist groups like America First.
And the sources list some fascinating names involved.
They do, including the famous author Roald Dahl, who was one of the BSC spies embedded in the American media landscape.
The idea that this beautiful architectural landmark was functioning as the nerve center for global intelligence, manipulating public opinion and foreign policy, it's just astounding. I mean, even the U.S. Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy was being closely watched by MI6 agents operating out of the center.
With Winston Churchill's blessing, because they were concerned Kennedy, who was an outspoken isolationist, could sway the public against the war.
So after the Axis threat subsided, the attention naturally shifted to the Soviets.
Right. In 1948, the Soviet Union opened a large exhibit at the center, displaying Russian exports like furs and vodka.
Which provided the perfect dual purpose, I imagine.
Exactly. It allowed Soviet diplomats and dignitaries access to the complex, but at the same time, it served as a magnet for anti-Soviet demonstrators, including political refugees, to protest the exhibition of lies right in the heart of Manhattan. Once again, Rockefeller Center was physically the center of the world's ideological conflict. So as we move into the 20th century, the family's deep industrial and political reach meant that when things went wrong, they went spectacularly wrong. And this led to massive public crises that really defined the character of the next generation.
We have to start with the Ludlow Massacre of 1914. I mean, this is a catastrophic blight on the reputation of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., who was heading up the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, which was largely owned by the family. Miners went on strike demanding better wages, safer conditions, and union recognition.
And the company responded with a brutality that just shocked the nation. They evicted the striking workers and their families from company housing, forcing them to live in the sprawling tent city that was set up by the union.
Yeah.
Then, private security forces, assisted by the state militia, systematically attacked the camp.
The result was just horrific. 13 women and children were burned to death when the militia set fire to the tents and striking miners were executed on the spot. I mean, this was essentially industrial warfare waged against American citizens by a company owned by one of the wealthiest men in the world.
And John Jr. made things so much worse initially by trying to wash his hands of responsibility, claiming he didn't manage the day-to-day operations. The public outcry was just deafening. Newspapers branded him a villain, accusing the Rockefellers of prioritizing profit over the fundamental safety and dignity of their workers.
And this crisis led directly to the birth of modern corporate public relations, didn't it?
It did. Jr. hired Ivy Lee, a PR pioneer, who advised him to completely reverse course, visit the striking miners, listen to their grievances, and offer visible, transparent solutions.
It was a successful strategy, though controversial. It shifted public focus from the bloodshed to Rockefeller's subsequent benevolence.
Right. But the lingering stain of Ludlow necessitated Jr.'s constant attempts to establish himself as a man of integrity, which leads us to his famous 1929 showdown, Rockefeller versus Stewart.
This was the battle of the century, as it was reported breathlessly in newspapers, and it was all taking place over the chairmanship of Standard Oil of Indiana. Jr., seeking the moral high ground, he demanded the removal of Colonel Robert W. Stewart, citing the need for ethics over profits.
But Stewart was a formidable opponent. He had successfully steered Standard Oil of Indiana's growth from a $175 million company to a $900 million giant. And when Jr. challenged him, Stewart famously declared, If the Rockefellers want to fight, I'll show them how to fight.
And his countermove was brilliant and purely financial. He declared a massive $332 million dividend distribution to shareholders just before the proxy vote.
It was a clear, calculated reminder to stockholders that he delivered colossal profits, challenging the Rockefellers' right to suddenly claim moral superiority after decades of their own dirty dealing.
But in the end, John Jr., using the powerful influence of his father's vast stock holdings, he ultimately won and removed Stewart.
He did, but the spectacle just underscored this constant, decades-long tension between the family's manufactured public image of institutional integrity and the naked pursuit of financial control.
And that deep entanglement with politics and public image really defined Nelson Rockefeller's career, culminating in his vice presidential confirmation hearings in 1974 under Gerald Ford.
Oh yeah, those hearings were essentially a full-scale financial audit. Congress scrutinized his entire 15 years as governor of New York, including the hugely expensive and controversial Empire State Plaza project, which critics had dubbed Nelson's Folly.
And they also intensely reviewed his controversial financial gifts, which totaled, what, $1.7 million given to various aides and public officials?
The political scrutiny was immense, but his personal life also provided a lot of fodder for the press, particularly after his death in 1979.
Right. Nelson died from a heart attack in his New York townhouse, but the public speculation was so intense because he was in the company of Megan Marshak, a 25-year-old staff member. And that led to decades of public rumors and scandal that the family tried desperately to contain.
And other family members, they sought a radical separation from the New York spotlight altogether just to escape that relentless scrutiny.
Like Winthrop Rockefeller. He's another son of JDR Jr., and he made this dramatic decision in 1953 to move across the country to Arkansas.
Right. And his stated reason was to avoid the headlines and the scandal in the press that was resulting from his high-profile, tempestuous 4-year-long divorce from Barbara Sears.
But the move became more than just an escape, didn't it? Winthrop actually revitalized Arkansas's two-party system and served as governor from 1967 to 1971. He instituted meaningful reforms, including major penal system changes and the state's first minimum wage.
He really did. He used the family name and money for genuine, localized political disruption.
Yet the most enduring and unsettling family scandal involves Nelson Rockefeller's son, Michael, who disappeared in 1961 at the age of 23.
He was in Dutch New Guinea collecting indigenous art, specifically Asmat wood carvings and these things called bish poles for his museum collection. His catamaran capsized, and he attempted to swim 14 miles to shore in a really dangerous area.
And while drowning is the most cited theory, the region was inhabited by the Asmat people, who were known at the time for headhunting and ritual cannibalism.
And the mystery just captured the global imagination, fueling decades of media coverage. Journalist Carl Hoffman later conducted what is considered the best researched argument, and he strongly suggested that Michael was killed and ritually eaten by 3 Asmat tribesmen in retaliation for an earlier incident where Dutch officials had massacred Asmat villagers.
It's a tragic, unsettling mystery. But Michael's legacy is preserved. The artifacts he collected, including those bistre poles, they form the core collection of the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a permanent monument to a life cut short by the pursuit of cultural knowledge.
And all of this history, the immense wealth, the political control, the scandals, the secrecy, it has now converged in the modern generation, which is facing the ultimate existential reckoning, the climate crisis and the legacy of fossil fuels.
And this has created a profound ethical and public split within the family itself. The descendants, who are keenly aware that the source of their prosperity is rooted in oil, they feel an enormous moral responsibility to shift focus entirely towards climate action.
And the divestment actions are just highly symbolic. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the RBF, they began divesting from fossil fuels way back in 2014, and the Rockefeller Family Fund, the RFF, followed in 2016.
And the most symbolic move of all came in 2020. The Rockefeller Foundation, the original entity founded with Standard Oil profits and carrying a $5 billion endowment, it pledged to dump all of its fossil fuel holdings.
And that move was powerful precisely because the foundation was the institutional attempt to purify the original oil money.
But they haven't stopped at just divestment. Fifth-generation descendants are actively funding legal action against the family's corporate successor, ExxonMobil. Descendants like Valerie Rockefeller Wayne have publicly stated that because their wealth came from fossil fuels, they feel a responsibility for everyone to move forward.
And David Kaiser, who's the grandson of David Rockefeller Sr., he went even further, publicly calling ExxonMobil morally bankrupt for its record on climate change. I mean, this use of philanthropic power against the source of their own fortune is just unprecedented.
And this funding is having direct, measurable results. The sources detail how the Rockefeller Family Fund, in partnership with other organizations, funded the Center for Climate Integrity, or CCI, report. And this report alleged that ExxonMobil had deliberately deceived the public about the recyclability of plastic for decades.
And that specific funding had immediate legal impact. When the California Attorney General filed a massive lawsuit against ExxonMobil in September of 2024, the complaint cited that CCI report, the one funded by the Rockefeller heirs, 9 separate times.
Wow.
It parroted the report's key arguments and relied on the internal industry documents that the CCI first gathered. Documents like the devastating 1986 internal industry memo stating plainly that recycling cannot be considered a permanent solid waste solution.
So this is the modern dynamic. The Rockefeller philanthropic mechanism, which was born from oil money and designed to manage public perception, is now being used by the descendants to expose the alleged corporate deception of its own financial successor. #outro.
What an incredible, tangled journey through the history of this dynasty.
It really is. We started with John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s relentless pursuit of efficiency, the use of these coercive mechanisms like railroad drawbacks, and the subsequent robber baron critique that forced a complete overhaul of the family's public identity.
Right. Then we detailed how JDR Jr. institutionalized that wealth into this model of strategic long-term philanthropy, the Rockefeller Foundation. But we also had to examine the dark ethical chapters, including that financial support for German eugenics research that persisted even after the rise of Nazism.
And we connected the family's deep entanglements in U.S. governance, from being instrumental in the secret creation of the Federal Reserve to ensuring their boys staffed the highest levels of U.S. intelligence and foreign policy.
All the way to operating a verifiable spy factory in Rockefeller Center during World War II.
Exactly. And finally, we saw the modern reckoning. The shift from industrial warfare at Ludlow, which required the invention of modern PR just to manage the fallout, to the modern descendants using their philanthropic clout to fund lawsuits against ExxonMobil, the corporate successor that inherited their moral and environmental liability.
The Rockefeller name, it remains the gold standard for global philanthropy, yet the family story is the ultimate blueprint showing how massive wealth acquisition and attempts at global betterment are just inherently entangled with political leverage, secrecy, and these profound ethical questions that transcend generations.
And the structure of strategic, long-term, solution-focused philanthropy established by JDR Sr. and Jr., it continues to dominate the field, even among those descendants who are now using it to disrupt the fossil fuel industry itself.
So consider this provocative thought, listener, that really ties the entire history of this dynasty together. The Rockefellers mastered the control over information. In the 20th century, whether it was managing the PR disaster of the Ludlow massacre or staffing the British Security Coordination in Rockefeller Center to manipulate the news during World War II, the family's institutional mechanisms were used to shape and control the public narrative.
But now, in the 21st century, their descendants are actively funding reports and lawsuits specifically designed to expose the corporate deception of their own family's financial successor, ExxonMobil. So the question is, how does the control of immense institutional wealth, whether through philanthropy or politics, influence what version of the truth gets funded, researched, and ultimately told? That struggle for narrative control is the Rockefeller legacy.